everybody, this is DeathGroundReviews, and it's another movie night with...
Coryphaeus.
That's right, and it's not very often that we watch a movie that is just awful, just terrible. Usually we've watched ones that we've liked quite a bit, but this time we watched a terrible movie. It was so horrible that I was a little bit depressed throughout the next day, had a depression hangover after watching it. It's kind of a rip-off of Terminator and Robocop, but it was called Rotor. What did that stand for again? R-O... Do you even remember?
I'm afraid I don't have it right in front of me. It was, guys, just terrible movie.
I don't even know if we can successfully, talk about the plot. I remember a horse drinking some coffee.
Yeah, there was right at the first. There was a horse drinking coffee, which is always a good way to start your day. So the basic plot line of this is, well, it was kind of stupid, but there was a guy named Cold Iron, of all things.
Yeah, right.
For some reason was in charge of the research department at the Dallas Police Force, which obviously the Dallas Police Force has a research department. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Don't they all?
I mean, they obviously had an LA branch at one point, so why not? But they were making a robotic police officer because obviously man was going to destroy itself without robotics coming in to fix the problem. And then something went terribly wrong.
Dun, dun, dun. Yes.
Which is actually written in the little precursor. And then something went terribly wrong.
Oh, did it? I totally missed that part. Yes, a horse drinking coffee, and there was just so much, the dialogue was the most unrealistic, trying too hard.
Okay, what was that one? I'll make more noise than two skeletons making love in a coffin.
Yes.
I'm like...
They were trying to do some kind of like poetic slang shit talking. So yeah, it was two guys. It was what, the mayor or the head of the research facility.
Who knows?
Yeah, we didn't.
Someone city council, vague.
Yeah. There's some kind of city council guy, and the guy that's the head of the tactical division, and he's threatening him his job.
If he doesn't come through even earlier than the 4 years that he thinks it's going to be, and there's a fight, and then it gets passed on to the other guy, and there's a robot that's not the robot that's part of the thing, but for some reason is like the most disinterested voiced robot I've ever heard. It's like, wasn't very interested. No one was actually interested in being in the movie, apparently, just by the tone in which they talked. It was like...
Yeah, they didn't look comfortable being there.
I think everyone had a little Robitussin before they started.
To get through it.
Yeah, the dialogue was awful. The pause, there was so much wasted time.
Yeah, there was a lot of shots of just cars driving.
Yeah, it was like...
There was a whole scene of a guy getting on the freeway and merging in the lanes to get off the freeway. We had a whole 2-minute scene of that. With like 80s supermarket music playing in the background.
You would imagine shopping and eventually they tell you to go to the deli, you just imagine it happening. Every character was some sort of stereotype, not even a well done caricature. It was like the most awful caricature of a stereotype for every character you can imagine.
Right.
You're just like, every person that wasn't one of the main people was a hillbilly with a terrible accent that was like, hey, oh golly, I'm getting out of here, woo! You're like, you can't be serious, this isn't real.
Yeah, no. There was, and then there were just these spastic fight scenes. Just so what was it? They're at the gas station, and a guy's robbing it, and then the tactical division guy shows up.
Yeah.
He has a gun hidden in the newspaper, and the lady, the cashier, turns out she's like, what, a black belt karate expert all of a sudden.
She's being taken out by one of the people. He's got his hand around the neck. He's like, come on, lady. You know, this awful Spanish-ish accent. Hombre crap. And she looks like she just looks disinterested as a man has a gun to her head. She's like, well, whatever. These things happen.
Yeah.
Like, nothing. And then he blows that guy's brains out, you know, as one does.
Right.
Right before which he beat up 2 people for the apparent reason of nothing. There's no real reason he should have. I mean, they were part of the group, but he had no evidence that they were, and he just kind of maxed the crap out of them for some reason.
And then somebody else attacks her, and then suddenly she's doing
another person comes out, and then suddenly she becomes like Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Oh, yeah.
Bam,
this like 60-year-old woman.
And, and then there's the couple that the first time the robot, he gets loosed because something went wrong, so they went to check it, and they activated the robot. But the robot only had its lower brain functions available, and so it had to go into its prime function for 50 years in the future. Which apparently 50 years in the future is going to be a lawless zone equivalent to, I don't know, Colombia. Like what era would you have to be in to have your police officers just gunning down people who sped down the road? Because that's what he kills the first guy. The robot kills the first guy for speeding or bribing him or something. Or both. The guy, you don't even care. The guy's such an ass that gets shot that you're just like indifferent.
Yeah, it was just kind of like a strange dream is what it felt like.
And then for some reason the car horn.
Oh yeah, the car horn disables the robot.
This robot has the
like
ability.
He turns into a migraine commercial when they blare the horn.
When migraines strike.
Pretty much, that's what happens. Yep.
And then she starts speeding off, and then she's like, I've got to talk. So she stops to wait for the officer who is trying to kill her to catch up. Because if your fiance was just gunned down and a person tried to kill you, the first thing you would think is, well, this is probably a misunderstanding.
I'm sure you guys are feeling pretty confused. It's okay. We are too.
I've watched this movie because there is a riff tracks. The guys of Mystery Science Theater 3000 do it. There's a riff tracks of it, and it's hilarious to watch. And so I've actually watched the show a number of times. I still don't know what's supposed to be going on most of the time.
Yeah.
I think I've watched it 5 or 6 times. I'm just like, yeah, I have no idea.
What I think partly...
So wait, why did it depress you so much?
Well, I'm a writer, and I just felt horribly embarrassed. I was like, because I've written some terrible crap too.
Oh yeah,
obviously, every writer is going to go through that. And I just felt so terribly embarrassed for the people, because I could tell they were trying really hard to do something that was edgy or, you know, something that maybe trying to make it a thinking film at the same time as an action, and it just didn't work. It was kind of like sticking Reese's peanut butter cups on pizza, you know? It just had that would taste terrible. It's not a good mix, and it wasn't for the film at all. Here's another thing I think that might have happened, is the editing room.
Oh.
They probably, you know, they had all these scenes they probably filmed, and they probably didn't get a good editor.
Yeah.
And they couldn't formulate it. They couldn't organize it in a coherent manner.
Yeah.
I was sitting there thinking about it over the past couple days, and I kind of wondered what could be done to improve that film. What could you have done to make it better?
Oh, I think if you had a different director, different writers, different actors.
Well, I guess I mean...
Different story.
Well, I guess I mean like in a closer up
Well, you know,
observation, like in the scene with the dialogue. Maybe if you just had like one or two weird lines like that, well placed, but then made the rest of it straightforward and understandable, it could have worked. Like the ones of skeletons banging in a coffin, I mean, confusing, yes, but maybe that could have been a unique element to that character had you played it right somehow.
Yeah, but I think part of the problem was it was almost as though someone had watched Robocop.
Okay.
And then they're like, I wonder if we can have a philosophical moment about society and what's going on in the world today. And because everything, the characters that end up fighting, like I said, every character's a stereotype. Like the worst possible stereotype. But it's almost as though Cold Iron hates the world, apparently. He almost seems like, if it was well written, he would almost seem like he was an arrogant man. Like he just assumed he had to save the world from itself. Because that's what the dialogue seems to suggest, right?
Well, and the boom mic was so not well placed that I could barely hear him a lot of times.
And it wasn't much of a, I mean, it was like, even when he talked kind of like this. We are degreed science fiction writers. And you're like...
And you know what's funny, though? Like, the movie Robocop does say interesting things about society.
Well,
but it does it without all these long-winded, confusing lectures that this film tries to portray.
And then suddenly throwing in, like, Milton quotes.
Yeah.
Into the... You're like, okay, not that I have anything against throwing in, quotes or anything like that, but it was so ham-fisted. It was so... Sometimes it's not just... because there's another movie that I quite like. It's a Roger Corman. It's a terrible movie. I don't ever come to the idea that you'd watch it and think it was a good movie. But it's called The Undead.
Okay.
You've seen it.
I probably have.
And the idea is that a guy figures out how to travel through time by taking somebody and regressing their thought process back through the ages to an earlier life. And it's actually a really interesting story.
Right.
It's just terrible actors, terrible writing, terrible directing, but the story idea is really good.
I got you.
And you're like, man, if you could just...
The rest of the execution didn't work.
Yeah.
But the seed was good.
Yeah, if you'd have taken, 2 more days.
That's what's tough with a film, because you have all these other people you have to work with, and they're feeding ideas into it. If you get, like you said, a good enough director or producer, they can monitor that successfully.
But in this case, it wasn't. It was like taking a Robocop, okay, and a Terminator concept.
Because the robot resembled a Terminator
more than the Robocop,
right? But it was in the police force like Robocop,
right? And the same kind of basic thing, like what are we going to do for the violence? Except this one's like looking forward to violence in the future. Which, I mean, there was a lot of that feeling at the time, and so I can appreciate why they thought that would be timely.
Yeah.
But in this case, it just... Robocop did what that one was hoping to do. It was already done. And so there's no... I mean, if you were to make a better movie, you'd made Robocop. And so there isn't really a way for me to say, how do you save this one? Because it's like, no, there was one that saved it. This is a ripoff of better storylines. But I think it does bring up an interesting point, which is because it felt like they were just trying to make comments on society in a way.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about making sure that if you're going to tell a story... I mean, any story is going to have a theme, and it's going to have conclusions, and it's going to have philosophical overtones, no matter what you do.
Right.
Okay, there's always going to be some meaning within it, to a certain extent. But if you try to write a story as a vehicle for that, I think it just becomes garbled.
It's belabored.
Very few people can get away with it. And there are a few, but these guys obviously weren't that. But when you find something like Robocop, it's action-packed. It's interesting. It has those things. And yet it can still, you could walk away and say, philosophically speaking, what do you think of this character? And what do you think of this character?
Right.
And I think that's the thing. If you have a good story, you don't need to... You can write the story without thinking of theme and all those things as much, because they will come through.
It'll emerge on its own. Fun fact on Robocop. So the director originally didn't want to do the film because he's like, oh, it's another run-of-the-mill action film. And he was a biblical scholar in college. But I guess his wife convinced him. She said, no, look, it's a metaphor of Christ, because he dies, and then is resurrected when he's made into the machine, and then he walks on water in the end. When he kills the crime boss at the end,
That's funny.
But see, all these little philosophical things she interpreted within the script, but weren't overtly there. Weren't loud and long-winded, but just emerged on their own.
Well, there's and this may come into that. There's an anime called Neo Genesis Evangelion, okay? And in it, it's a mecha, which means there's just big robots and people are moving them. But the idea is that there are these angels, okay, which are alien beings, that they have to fight, right?
Right.
What's interesting about it is, it is, I'd say, 50% philosophy and 50% action. It's what it is. And it can be very confusing. It can be very, but there's something classical because it makes sense that the part of the fight against the angels is up here. Okay.
Up in the mind.
Up in the mind. Yeah, I'm sorry. You guys can't see where I'm pointing. But the thing about this is it seemed that they were trying to. There was the time when, so the two scientists who did this is cold iron,
right,
and steel. There you go. But they're talking about how to try to this. This is our own lower brain. You have to use your failure against it. You will have to learn how to fail. It's like, oh man, this is too ham-fisted. It was like suddenly we're having this thing with goofy rednecks getting killed and a poor woman who I'm still not sure why she had to keep running all the time or driving away from it, because she never told anyone where she was going. But suddenly in the middle of it, they start ham-fisting this weird thing about humanity and nature versus robot. You're like, what? It didn't even make sense.
No.
And that's what I mean by it. It was so unnatural. So it was like someone came to him. It's almost like someone came to a philosophy major who worked at a studio and said, I want you to do a cheap Robocop we can get out in the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And so they tried to like mishmax all their interests into this cheap Robocop.
Exactly.
And the hillbillies were the most... I can't get over how bad the hillbillies were. Every hillbilly... In fact, one of them actually had buck teeth. Like, hey!
It was...
What you doing in here?
It was like literal gopher...
Yeah.
Gopher-sized, rabbit-sized buck teeth, man.
Oh, I just... Like, how much do you hate rural people? Like, I get that there's a lot of movies that kind of... they'll either
kind of tease with...
Make fun or do that. That's fine. This wasn't even that. This was like... If you're not from the city, you're kind of an idiot.
Automatic mental deficiency.
Yeah, it really was. You're like, wait, what? Every rural person, well, what's here, you city person, you dang shit. I was like... Anyways, I'm sorry. That really... It just threw me. Because it takes you out of the movie to start out with. And then it's not funny. They didn't do it in a funny way. any humor in the movie is unintentional. Not one of the jokes landed.
No. All trying too hard.
The closest one was when he has the carrot and right at the first, when he has the carrot and the cup of coffee, and he gives the cup of coffee to the horse. That's the closest joke that lands. You're like, I see. And then it goes downhill from there.
Yeah.
It's just... But I wasn't depressed. I honestly just... It really reminds you that if you have a bad idea, going to a group of people to help you only makes the idea worse. Like a bad idea that has a group of people trying to implement it is just a multiplicity of bad ideas.
It's just growing more weeds. Well, it makes me think of the film Jaws: The Revenge.
Oh yeah.
The director of that, he said they were completely convinced they had a brilliant idea, but it was truly terrible. But everybody in the cast, including Michael Caine, believed they were making a great film during those 5 or so months they made it,
And they just so were not.
Yeah.
It's not the worst film, but it's not a great film.
So that's something to beware of as an artist of some kind. Is sometimes you can be invested in something so much that's truly bad, but there's some darling in your work that you can't let go of, and you convince yourself it's great.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you have to listen to the friends around you that see what's not great, I guess.
Yeah, and I think there's a point there. I think when you get a group of people who are like, yeah, this can work, sometimes it just can't.
The power of the imagination.
Yeah, there's movies every year that come out that most people will never see because they're so bad. This is one of them. Don't see it. Unless you go to Riff Tracks and watch the one they have, which by then, that's great.
It's at least worth a watch. You'll laugh at their jokes. Their commentary's hilarious.
Yeah, the Riff Tracks is hilarious. It makes it worth watching.
The movie's mindless anyway, but they make it mindless fun.
Yeah. So how do you rate this?
The film out of 5? Oh, heavens. No stars at all.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
It's complete garbage.
I'm with you. Those kind of things are interesting because if there's a great movie, there's stuff you can talk about, but you're rehashing. And when there's a terrible movie, there's stuff you can talk about, but it's just rehashing. And there's something to be said about that. It's just, this is a no star. If you love bad movies, this one needs to be part of your collection. And if you don't have that much time to waste on a movie, just don't bother.
Absolutely. You will marvel at how terrible it is. But yeah.
And you'll have that weird image of 2 skeletons making love in a coffin. There you go.
That's a good image to leave you guys with. This has been DeathGroundReviews, another movie night with
Coryphaeus.
And we'll talk to you again soon. See you guys.
Pleasant dreams.